While I was in the hospital, my sister secretly sold almost everything inside my house. She believed I would never recover quickly enough to stop her. But she had no idea that one decision she made would destroy every lie she had been telling my family. I didn't know any of that when I first came home. All I knew was that something was wrong before I even touched the front door. I had been away for 3 weeks, 3 weeks in a hospital bed, followed by several days at a rehabilitation facility, while I learned how to move around comfortably again after surgery. I had spent most of that time thinking about ordinary things. Getting home. Making coffee in my own kitchen. Sleeping in my own bed. Seeing my old photographs. Sitting on the porch in the chair my grandfather had built for my mother, which she eventually gave to me. I missed those things more than I could explain. The morning I was discharged, my best friend Claire picked me up. "You ready?" she asked, as she loaded my small overnight bag into her car. "As ready as I'm ever going to be." She smiled. "Your sister said she'd have the house cleaned before you got back." I looked at her. "What?" "Your sister, Megan, she texted me yesterday, said she'd made sure everything was taken care of." I stared through the passenger side window. Megan, my younger sister. For most of my life, Megan had been the person everyone in our family described as the sensitive one. She was 7 years younger than me, which meant I had spent a good portion of my childhood taking care of her. When our parents divorced, I became the dependable daughter. When Dad moved across the country, I became the person Megan called when she needed money. When Mom got sick years later, Megan cried and I handled the paperwork. That was our family dynamic. Megan felt things. I fixed things. And somehow, over the years, everybody had gotten used to it. "Did she say anything else?" I asked. Claire shrugged. "Just that she wanted to make things easier for you." I nodded slowly. That sounded like Megan. At least, it sounded like the version of Megan I still believed existed. I didn't know that while I was lying in a hospital bed, she had already made several trips to my house. I didn't know she had hired a man with a moving truck. I didn't know she had posted photographs of my belongings online. And I definitely didn't know that she had spent hours opening drawers, pulling books from shelves, moving furniture, and searching through places I hadn't touched in years. All I knew was that I was finally going home. The drive took about 40 minutes. As we turned onto my street, I remember feeling an almost embarrassing sense of relief. My house wasn't fancy. It was a 2-story brick house built in the late 1970s, with a narrow driveway, a small front porch, and a maple tree my grandfather had planted when I was a child. I'd lived there for 11 years. It wasn't just a house. It was the one place in my family where I had ever felt completely settled. Claire slowed down. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "Did you change your curtains?" I looked up. "What?" "Your front windows." I stared at the house. The curtains were gone. Not open. Gone. Both downstairs windows were completely bare. I frowned. Maybe Megan took them down to wash them. Claire didn't answer. Then I noticed something else. The porch looked strangely empty. I leaned forward. "Where's the bench?" Claire stopped the car at the curb. Neither of us spoke. The bench had been there for as long as I could remember. My grandfather had built it by hand from oak planks. There were 3 small dents along one side, from when I had accidentally dropped a flower pot on it as a teenager. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't antique, but it was mine. I opened my door. Claire caught my arm. "Wait." "Why?" "I don't know." She looked at the house. "So do I." I stepped onto the sidewalk. The closer I got, the stranger everything looked. The porch was almost completely bare. The bench was gone. The welcome mat was gone. The 2 ceramic planters Mom had given me were gone. Even the little brass wind chime hanging beside the front door had disappeared. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Megan." There was no answer. I pulled out my keys. Then I noticed the lock. There were fresh scratches around it. Not enough to look like someone had broken in. More like someone had used a key that didn't fit quite right. My hand froze. Claire came up behind me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." I didn't believe myself. I put the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened. And I immediately knew. The first thing I noticed was the silence. My house had always made little noises. The refrigerator hummed, the old floorboards creaked. The ceiling fan in the living room clicked every few seconds, because I'd never gotten around to replacing it. There was always something, but now there was nothing. No furniture, no rugs, no lamp, no photographs. I stepped inside. Claire whispered, "Oh my God." The living room was empty. Completely empty. The couch was gone. The coffee table was gone. The television was gone. The bookcase was gone. The framed photographs lining the wall had disappeared. I walked slowly toward the dining room. The table was gone. The chairs were gone. The china cabinet Mom had left me was gone. I stopped breathing for a second. "Claire." She didn't answer. She was staring at the wall. "Those pictures," she whispered. Yes. Every family photograph had been removed. Not just the expensive frames. Everything. Pictures of my parents when they were young. Pictures of Megan and me at Christmas. My grandfather, holding me on my 5th birthday. Mom standing beside the first car she'd ever owned. My parents on their wedding day. All gone. I walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator was still there. The cabinets were nearly empty. The plates were gone. The glasses were gone. The coffee maker was gone. Even the mixing bowls I'd had since college were missing. Someone hadn't robbed my house. Someone had gone through it. Someone had made decisions. I turned toward Claire. "Call Megan." She already had her phone out. The call rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Voicemail. Again. She called again. Nothing. I felt my heart pounding. "Maybe she sold things to pay your medical bills," Claire said carefully. I stared at her. She didn't have permission. I know. She wouldn't do this. Claire looked around the empty room. Wouldn't she? That question hurt more than I expected. I walked upstairs. The hallway looked wrong without the family portraits. My bedroom door was open. I pushed it wider. My bed was gone. My dresser was gone. The antique mirror Mom had given me was gone. The closet doors were open. My clothes were still there. That was strange. If Megan had been selling things, why leave my clothes? I walked to the closet. Several hangers were missing, but most of my clothes remained. Then I saw the carpet. There were fresh rectangular marks where furniture had been sitting. Someone had moved everything. Everything except the things they didn't want. I walked into my home office. The desk was gone. The filing cabinet was gone. The shelves were empty. I stared at the wall where I'd kept several framed certificates. Gone. Then I noticed the floor. There were tiny scraps of paper scattered near the baseboard. I crouched down. One piece had writing on it. I picked it up. It was part of a receipt. The name at the top was unfamiliar. Below it was a list. Dining table. Oak cabinet. Porcelain set. Living room furniture. I stared at it. Then Claire crouched beside me. "That's a resale shop." "How do you know?" "My mother used to sell antiques." I looked at the receipt again. "She sold my things to a store?" "Looks like it." "Why?" Claire didn't answer. I stood up. Something about the receipt bothered me. Not because Megan had sold my belongings. Because of what was missing from the list. The bench. The photographs. The office files. Those weren't on it. I walked back downstairs. "Wait." Claire followed me. "What?" "Some things are missing that weren't valuable." "Like what?" I looked toward the empty wall where my grandfather's photograph had hung. Things that mattered. Claire's expression changed. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet." I went to the kitchen. The drawers were mostly empty. I opened them one by one. Utensils, nothing. Dish towels, nothing. Batteries, nothing. Then I opened the narrow drawer beside the refrigerator. Empty. I stared at it. I had kept spare keys there. One particular key. A tiny brass key that had belonged to my grandfather. It wasn't there. I felt a cold sensation move through me. "Claire," she came closer. "What? Did you ever know about a key I kept here?" "No." I checked the drawer again. Nothing. I shut it. Then my phone rang. It was Megan. I answered immediately. "Where are you?" Silence. "Megan." "I heard you're home." Her voice sounded unusually flat. Why did you empty my house? Another pause. I didn't empty your house. I laughed once because the alternative was screaming. I am standing in an empty living room. You mean the furniture? I mean almost everything. You needed the money. What? For your recovery. I stared at the wall. Who told you I needed money? You've been out of work. I have insurance. I know. Then why did you sell my things? I didn't sell everything. Where's Grandpa's bench? Silence. Megan, I don't know. Where are Mom's photographs? I don't know. You were in my house. I was helping. You were not helping. Her voice became sharper. You weren't supposed to come home yet. The room went silent. Claire looked at me. I lowered the phone. What did you just say? I said you weren't supposed to come home yet. Why? I thought you were staying at rehab longer. You knew my discharge date. I thought plans changed. You spoke to my doctor. I spoke to the hospital. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer. Then she said quietly, You should stay with Claire tonight. My stomach tightened. Why? Because your house isn't safe. I looked around the empty room. Safe from what? Megan hung up. I stood there holding the phone. Claire stared at me. What did she mean? I don't know. But I knew one thing. Megan had lied. She hadn't emptied the house because she thought I needed money. And she hadn't expected me home. I spent the next hour documenting everything. Claire took photographs of every room. We found evidence that someone had been inside repeatedly, not just once. There were fresh scuff marks on the hardwood. Dust outlines showed where furniture had stood. The basement had been disturbed. The attic had been disturbed. And then we found something that changed the entire situation. My grandfather's old trunk was gone. It had been stored in the attic. I'd never opened it. Not since Mom died. It contained old family papers, letters, and a few personal items from my grandfather's generation. Nothing I considered valuable. At least, that's what I'd always believed. I called the police. An officer named Harris came out that afternoon. He walked through the house while I explained what had happened. Do you know who had access? My sister. Did you give her permission? To check on the house, not to sell anything. Do you have proof she sold the property? I showed him the receipt. He photographed it. Do you have serial numbers? For furniture? Anything valuable? I shook my head. Most of it had sentimental value, not monetary value. He looked around. Was anything damaged? Not really. Then this may be a civil matter. But she took my property. If she admits taking it, that changes things. She already admitted she was in the house. Being in the house isn't the same as stealing. I understood what he meant, but it still felt unbearable. After he left, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen counter. There's something you're not telling me. I looked at her. What? You've been acting like you know why she did this. I don't. You noticed the missing key. I looked away. Claire waited. Finally, I said, Grandpa used to tell me that some things in our family were better left alone. Like what? I don't know. That's not an answer. I rubbed my forehead. When I was little, Grandpa had a metal box. Claire frowned. What kind? Small. Gray. Maybe 6 inches wide. What's in it? I never saw. Where was it? I don't know. I looked toward the stairs. After he died, Mom kept it somewhere. Do you think Megan was looking for it? I don't know. Claire was quiet. Then she said, Was the trunk where the box might have been? I stared at her. Maybe. We went back upstairs. The attic was dusty and mostly empty. The trunk was gone. But something else had been disturbed. An old wooden panel near the far wall was loose. I knelt down. There was a narrow space behind it. Empty. Claire looked over my shoulder. What was there? I don't know. I ran my fingers along the edge. Then I noticed a small scratch in the wood. A recent scratch. Someone had pried this panel open. My sister hadn't just taken furniture. She had searched the house. And suddenly the missing photographs made sense. The missing files. The missing trunk. The missing key. She hadn't been cleaning. She had been looking for something. Something hidden. Something she believed I had. I called Megan again. This time, she answered immediately. Where is the trunk? Silence. You took it. No. You searched the attic. I was looking for something. What? She breathed out slowly. I can't tell you. Then I'm going to find out. You don't understand. Then explain it. I can't. Why? Because if Mom was wrong about it, none of this matters. My heart stopped. What did you just say? He hung up. I stood there frozen. Mom was wrong about what? I called again. No answer. That night, Claire refused to let me stay alone. I stayed at her apartment, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I remembered something. A conversation with Mom from years ago. I had forgotten about it completely until Megan said her name. Mom had been sitting at my kitchen table, going through old paperwork. She had looked frightened. Not sad, not worried. Frightened. She'd asked me a strange question. Did your grandfather ever give you anything? I'd laughed. Like what? Anything important. No. She had stared at me for several seconds. Then she'd said, good? At the time I thought she'd been confused. Now I wasn't so sure. I got out of bed and opened my phone. There was one person I hadn't called yet. My mother's older sister, Elaine. I called. She answered on the 4th ring. Sweetheart. Aunt Elaine, I need to ask you something. What happened? Did Grandpa ever keep a metal box? There was silence. Long enough that I could hear her breathing. Then she asked, who told you about that? My blood went cold. No, none. Don't lie to me. I'm not. Another silence. Then Aunt Elaine said something I'll never forget. Your mother promised me that box would never be opened. Why? I don't know if I should tell you. Please. She exhaled. Because what's inside could prove that someone in this family has been lying for a very long time. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Who? She didn't answer. Aunt Elaine? I'm sorry. Who has been lying? She whispered. Ask yourself why your sister was so desperate to find it. Then she hung up. The next morning, I drove back to my house alone. I didn't call Megan. I didn't call the police. I simply walked through every room again. This time, I wasn't looking at what was missing. I was looking at what she'd ignored. My clothes, some old kitchen appliances, a broken television, boxes of books, things with no obvious value. If Megan had wanted money, she would have taken everything worth selling. Instead, she'd ignored thousands of dollars worth of ordinary possessions and targeted specific things. The trunk, the photographs, the files, the key. I went into the bedroom closet. There was one box at the very back that nobody had touched. It was filled with old holiday decorations. I opened it. Nothing. Then I remembered the key. The little brass key I'd kept in the kitchen drawer was gone. But perhaps it wasn't the only one. I searched through an old jewelry box. Nothing. A drawer. Nothing. Then I remembered Grandpa's habit. Whenever he wanted to hide something, he never put it somewhere complicated. He put it somewhere ordinary. Somewhere people stopped noticing. I walked downstairs. I looked at the kitchen table. Then the baseboards. Then the cabinets. Then the old wall clock. Nothing. Finally, I walked into the dining room. Or, what used to be the dining room. I stared at the empty wall. One small nail remained where the china cabinet had been. I pulled it out. Behind it was a tiny crack. I pressed the wall. Nothing happened. I pressed again. A section moved. I froze. Behind the wall was a narrow cavity, and inside that cavity was a small metal box. I didn't touch it immediately. I just stared. Megan had spent days searching for it. She had sold my furniture, removed my photographs, taken my grandfather's trunk, searched my attic, and somehow, she had missed this. I picked up the box. It was heavier than I expected. There was no lock on the front, just a tiny keyhole. I suddenly remembered the missing brass key. My sister had taken it. She had found the box. But she hadn't opened it. She had only taken the key, which meant She still didn't have what she wanted. And that meant there was only one question left. Why hadn't she found the box? The answer came to me when I turned it over. There was a second compartment underneath, a hidden latch. I pressed it. The bottom opened slightly. Inside was a tiny folded note. My hands started shaking as I unfolded it. There were only 6 words. Don't trust the person asking. I read it again, then again, and suddenly, every conversation I'd had with Megan over the past 3 weeks sounded different. Her concern, her questions, her insistence that I stay at rehab, her warning that my house wasn't safe. She hadn't been afraid for me. She had been afraid I'd come home before she found something. I folded the note and put it back. Then I heard a car door slam outside. I looked through the window. Megan was standing in my driveway. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her. I didn't recognize him. Megan looked directly at the house, then at the upstairs window. Then she raised her phone. My phone buzzed. A text from her. Please don't open the box. I stared at the message. Then another one appeared. You don't know what Mom did. I looked at the metal box in my hands. For the first time since coming home, I wasn't angry. I was scared. Because if Megan had been willing to destroy my house to find this box, whatever was inside wasn't just another family secret. It was something someone had spent years trying to keep buried. I carried the box into the kitchen. I checked the windows. I locked the back door. Then I walked toward the front entrance. Through the glass, I could still see Megan standing outside. She wasn't knocking. She was waiting for me to make a decision. I didn't know yet what was inside that box, but I knew one thing. Whatever it was, my sister had already risked everything to find it. So I decided I was going to open it myself. I lock the front door. I close the curtains. I place a small metal box on the kitchen table. I unlock it with a hidden key. Inside is only one document. The moment I see the name at the top, I realize my sister was never searching for money. She had been searching for this. I stared at the name at the top of the document until the words blurred. Then I read it again and again. The name wasn't mine. It wasn't Megan's. It wasn't my mother's. It was my father's. Daniel Mercer. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My father had been dead for almost 9 years. I hadn't spoken to him during the final year of his life. And yet there it was, printed in black ink on a document dated 26 years earlier. Under his name was another name. My grandfather's, Robert Mercer. My hands began to shake. I picked up my phone and took photographs of every page before touching anything else. There were 4 pages. The first was a legal document. The second contained a list of property transfers. The third was a handwritten statement. The fourth had several signatures. I didn't understand everything I was reading, but I understood enough to know this wasn't an ordinary family paper. There was a property involved. Not my house. Another property. A small piece of land outside town that had belonged to my grandfather. And according to the document, my grandfather had transferred ownership of it to my mother. Not my father. My mother. That alone seemed strange. But then I saw the date. The transfer had happened 2 days before my parents announced their divorce. I sat down. My father had always told us the divorce happened because my mother had left him. That was the story I grew up with. Mom had become unhappy. Mom had wanted another life. Mom had walked away. Dad had been the victim. Megan had believed that story. I had believed it too. But the document told a different story. I kept reading. The property had been sold several years later. The money from that sale had apparently been placed into an account controlled by my mother. There were handwritten notes about medical expenses, legal fees, and something called custodial trust. I didn't understand what that meant. Then I reached the handwritten statement. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandfather's. I recognized it immediately. He had written, "I am putting this in writing because someday the truth may be needed." I stopped. My heart was pounding. The next lines explained that my father had been taking money from a family business without my grandfather's knowledge. When my grandfather discovered it, he confronted him. My father denied everything. Then, he threatened to blame my mother. My grandfather didn't believe him. According to the statement, my father had forged several documents connected to the family property. My grandfather had quietly transferred the property to my mother, so my father couldn't sell it or use it as collateral. But there was something else, something that made me put the paper down. My grandfather had written that my father had asked him to sign a document, making him the sole beneficiary of a family trust. My grandfather refused. The next sentence was underlined twice. Daniel told me that if I did not cooperate, he would make sure my daughters never knew the truth about him. I covered my mouth. My father had threatened my grandfather. My father had lied to us. And my mother had apparently spent years protecting us from the truth. But why had Megan been looking for this? I turned to the fourth page. There were signatures. My grandfather's, my mother's, and another signature. I knew it immediately. Megan. I dropped the document. She had signed it. But the date was impossible. Megan had been 8 years old. She couldn't have signed a legal document. I picked it up again. Then I realized it wasn't Megan's signature. It was my father's. He had signed her name. I suddenly understood why Megan had been so desperate. Someone had been looking for proof. Not proof that my father had lied. Proof that someone had forged documents in Megan's name. And if that document still existed, it could explain something that had bothered her for years. The phone on the table rang. Megan. I stared at the screen. Then answered. Why? She didn't speak. Why did you empty my house? Nothing. Why were you looking for this? Her voice finally came through. Because I needed to know if it was real. You knew about it. I knew there was a document. How? My father told me. I closed my eyes. Your father? Daniel. She still called him that when she was angry. Not Dad. Daniel. What did he tell you? He told me Grandpa had left something that could destroy our family. Our family? He said Mom had stolen money. I looked down at the document. That's not what this says. I know. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know what to believe. I heard the man's voice in the background. Megan, don't. I recognized the voice. I didn't know him personally, but suddenly I remembered seeing him once. At my father's funeral. His name was Richard Hale, my father's old business partner. Megan, I said. Who is with you? She didn't answer. Richard did. Me. My stomach tightened. Why? Because you have something that belongs to my client. Your client? Your father left certain financial matters unresolved. I laughed bitterly. My father has been dead for 9 years. That doesn't erase contractual obligations. You came to my house with my sister after she emptied it? We're trying to prevent a misunderstanding. No. I looked at the document. You were trying to find this. Silence. That silence told me more than words could have. I stood up. Richard, leave my property. We should discuss this. No. I ended the call. Then, I called Aunt Elaine. She answered immediately. Did you find it? Yes. She exhaled. Then you need to listen to me. What is it? Your mother never stole anything. I know. No, sweetheart, you don't. I sat down again. What don't I know? Your father didn't just take money. She paused. He took it from you. I couldn't breathe. What? The family trust. I looked at the document. What trust? The trust your grandfather created for you and Megan. I stared at the page. Why didn't I know about it? Because your mother didn't want you to. That doesn't make sense. It does if you understand what your father was trying to do. Aunt Elaine told me everything she knew. My grandfather had created separate trusts for both of his granddaughters. The money came from the sale of the family property. The accounts were supposed to become accessible when we reached adulthood. But after my grandfather died, the trust accounts were nearly empty. My mother had told us the money had been used for medical expenses. That wasn't true. She had used some of it to pay legal fees and recover money that my father had taken. But she had hidden the rest because she was afraid he'd come after us. The document proved it. My father had taken money from my trust first, then Megan's. When my mother discovered what he had done, she confronted him. He threatened her. She took the remaining assets and placed them under legal protection. But there was one problem. My mother died before the matter was fully resolved. And after her death, the legal dispute disappeared into a maze of paperwork. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Aunt Elaine's voice broke. "Because your mother made me promise." "She made you promise to let me believe she was a liar?" "She wanted you to have a normal life." I looked around my empty house. "That's not what happened." "No." She began crying. "She thought if you knew, you'd spend your life fighting your father." "I spent my life believing him." "I know. And Megan?" "Your mother told me she suspected Daniel had been manipulating Megan." I sat there silently. Everything suddenly made sense. Megan had been 8 when my parents divorced. She had spent years hearing our father's version of events. She had been told Mom had betrayed him. She had been told Grandpa had been unfair. She had been told that I was favored. And when our father died, he apparently left her with one final story. That somewhere inside my house was a document proving that Mom had stolen everything. Megan had believed him. Until recently. "Why now?" I asked. Aunt Elaine hesitated. "Because Richard contacted her." I closed my eyes. "Why?" "He told her there was a missing document connected to your father's estate." "Richard knew about the document?" "He was involved in the original business." "Then he knew what Daniel had done." "Yes." I suddenly remembered the man standing beside Megan. He wasn't helping her. He was using her. I hung up and called Claire. She arrived 20 minutes later. I showed her the document. She read it silently. When she finished, she looked at me. "Your sister destroyed your house looking for this?" "Yes." "Does she know what it actually says?" "I don't think so." "Then she needs to." I called Megan. She answered immediately. "Come inside." "What?" "Come inside." There was a long pause. Then the front door opened. Megan walked in alone. She looked exhausted. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were red. For the first time in years, she looked like my little sister again. Not the woman who had emptied my house. Not the person who had betrayed me. Just Megan. She stopped when she saw the document. "That's it?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Can I see it?" I handed it to her. She read the first page, then the second. By the third page, she was crying. "No." She shook her head. "No, no, no." I said nothing. She reached the handwritten statement. Her face changed. "Grandpa knew." "Yes, he knew what Dad did." "Yes." She sat down. "I spent my whole life thinking Mom ruined everything." "I did too." She looked at me. "You?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't know." She stared at the document. "Richard told me Dad had proof." "He lied?" "I know. He used you." She covered her face. "I sold your things." "I know. I sold Mom's china." I looked away. "I sold Grandpa's tools." My eyes filled with tears. "The bench?" "I sold that too." "Why?" "Because Richard said the document could be anywhere. He said we needed to search everything." "We?" She lowered her hands. "He told me if I found it, we could prove Mom had stolen Dad's money." "Did you believe him?" "At first. And then? I started finding things that didn't make sense." She wiped her eyes. "The receipts, the papers, the photographs." "You took the photographs?" "I didn't sell them." "What?" "I took them." She looked at me. "I couldn't sell them." "Where are they?" "In my garage." I stared at her. "All of them?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they were the only things I couldn't bring myself to destroy." I felt a complicated mixture of anger and relief. "Where's the bench?" She looked down. "I don't know." "What do you mean?" "Richard sold it." My chest tightened. "To whom?" "I don't know." I stood up. "Find it." "I will." "No." I pointed at the document. "You are going to help me fix everything you broke." She nodded. "I will." "And Richard?" Her expression hardened. "He told me this morning that if I didn't find the document, he'd tell the police I had stolen everything." I stared at her. He threatened you? Yes. Did he know you had taken the document? No. Good. I called an attorney, not the first one I found. A friend of Claire's knew someone who handled estates and property disputes. His name was Michael. He came over that afternoon. He read the document 3 times. Then he looked at me. This is significant. Can my sister get in trouble? Potentially. Megan looked at him. I'll take responsibility. He shook his head. That isn't the only issue. He pointed to the signature page. This establishes that your grandfather created trusts for both of you. What does that mean? I asked. It means your father may have unlawfully transferred assets belonging to you and your sister. Megan stared at him. And Mom? Your mother appears to have been trying to preserve those assets. I looked down. Can we recover anything? Possibly. How? First, we need to establish where the money went. Michael told us to preserve everything. The document, the receipts, my sister's messages, the resale shop records, the photographs, everything. Then he called someone. Within 2 days, we had records. The furniture had been sold to several buyers. The photographs were still in Megan's garage. The china was recovered from a resale store. And the bench? A family in the next county had bought it. Megan drove with me to get it. When I saw it sitting in their backyard, I almost cried. The woman who owned it was kind. She had no idea where it came from. She agreed to sell it back for exactly what she'd paid. When we loaded it into my car, Megan stood beside me. I'm sorry. I looked at her. You don't get to fix everything with those words. I know. You broke something. I know. Trust isn't furniture. She nodded. I know. I didn't forgive her that day, but I didn't walk away either. That was enough. The bigger fight came afterward. Michael discovered that Richard had been attempting to revive an old claim against my grandfather's estate. The document stopped him. It proved that my grandfather had explicitly rejected the arrangement Richard was trying to enforce. More importantly, it showed that my father had falsified signatures and transferred money that didn't belong to him. The matter eventually went to court. Richard denied knowing about the document. Then, the evidence from my sister's messages showed otherwise. He had repeatedly told her where to search. He had known about the old property. He had known about the trust. And he had lied to Megan about my mother. He had counted on us fighting each other. Instead, for the first time in our adult lives, Megan and I sat on the same side of a table. We testified together. We told the truth. And when it was over, the judge ordered the remaining assets to be accounted for. Some money was recoverable. Some wasn't. My father had spent years moving it around, but enough remained that Megan and I received something neither of us had known existed. Our grandfather's final gift. Not a fortune. Not enough to change our lives overnight, but enough to prove that our grandfather had never abandoned us. And my mother had never betrayed us. She had spent years protecting us from a man we thought deserved our loyalty. That realization hurt more than anything Megan had done. Months later, my house slowly became a home again. The couch came back. The photographs returned. The china was placed in a new cabinet. The curtains went back up. And eventually, Grandpa's bench came home. I sanded it myself. Megan helped me stain it. We didn't talk much that afternoon. We didn't need to. When we finished, she sat beside me. Do you think Mom knew we'd find out? I looked at the house. I think she hoped we would. Megan nodded. She was always better at keeping secrets than I was. I smiled sadly. She was. There was one final thing I hadn't told Megan. The document wasn't the only thing in the hidden compartment. The note had been there too. The one that said, "Don't trust the person asking." I showed it to her. She read it. Then she laughed through her tears. Grandpa knew. Apparently. Do you think he knew we'd fight? Probably. She looked at me. Do you hate me? I thought about the empty house, the missing photographs, the bench, the weeks of fear. Then I looked at my sister. No. She looked surprised. I don't hate you. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not yet. She nodded. That's fair. But you're still my sister. She looked down. I don't want to lose you. Then don't. That was the closest thing to forgiveness I could give her. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Some things don't return to the way they were. Trust doesn't work like a piece of furniture you can carry back through the front door. But sometimes people do something harder than apologizing. They stay, they help repair what they broke, and they stop lying. A year later, the house looked almost exactly the way it had before. Almost. The only difference was that I never again kept important documents where anyone could find them. The metal box went into a safe. The original document stayed there. The photographs were back on the walls, and Grandpa's bench sat on the porch beneath the maple tree. One evening, Megan came over. We sat outside until sunset. She looked at the bench and smiled. Grandpa would have hated all of this. I laughed. He would have yelled at Dad. He would have yelled at all of us. Probably. She leaned back. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did Dad tell me you had everything? I thought about it. Because if he could make you believe I had something he wanted, you'd spend your life looking at me instead of him. Megan went quiet. Then she said, he almost succeeded. I looked at her. Almost. We sat there in silence. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. And that was when I finally understood what had really been stolen from our family. It wasn't the furniture. It wasn't the photographs. It wasn't the money. It was the truth. For years, my father had taken that from us. He had made my mother the villain. He had made my sister suspicious of me. He had turned love into competition, and family into a battlefield. But in the end, the one thing he couldn't destroy was the evidence. My grandfather had known that someday we'd need it. So he hid the truth where nobody would think to look. And when my sister tore my house apart searching for it, she accidentally did the one thing our father had spent years preventing. She forced us to find the truth together. I still get angry when I think about what happened. Sometimes I look at the empty spaces and old photographs and remember what used to be there. Sometimes I remember walking into my house that day and seeing everything I loved stripped away. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never come home when I did. But then I look at the bench on the porch, the one my grandfather built, the one my sister sold, the one we brought home together, and I remember that some things can be repaired. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. Megan and I aren't the sisters we were before all of this. We're different now, more careful, more honest, and, strangely enough, closer. Because the first time in our lives, neither of us is carrying our father's version of the story anymore. We're carrying the truth. And honestly, that's worth more than anything he ever took from us.